I'm expecting people to click on this video ready to disagree with me. I'll admit, surprisingly, Phoenix's buff were decent, and he's at least playable now. I'm even hearing people say that Reyna is now the worst duelist, which I think is mind-blowing, but I also think it's the perfect opportunity to drive my argument home. Let's not get ahead of ourselves though. Let's cover his current buffs. Overall, like I said, Phoenix is playable.
What's up?
His flash buff was good, but in reality even this wasn't much of an improvement. Phoenix players were already using a tech prior to this buff to speed up his flash, so this only removed an extra step and made it more consistent. His molly was always decent, and his wall still does its basic job of blocking off enemies. But it's not enough. In a couple of weeks, Phoenix will go back to being slightly irrelevant because his kit is still not as valuable as other agents. Let's talk about his rework, and I'll explain why he needs it as we go. His flashes are fine. Riot doesn't need to make any change to this ability. The first change I'd make is to combine his molly and wall. This makes space for another ability, without getting rid of his wall entirely. Both of these abilities currently heal Phoenix, and I'm pretty sure Riot has been afraid of making changes to these two abilities for this reason. If you buff the healing too much, you suddenly give the player a lot of room to make mistakes. Hence, why his wall doesn't heal as much. The intended use for this ability, from Riot's perspective, was always to just block off lines of sight. Healing was just a little extra. His molly is mostly used to heal, and sometimes to hold enemies back, but it truthfully doesn't do enough damage in comparison to other mollies for it to be considered powerful. By creating the option for players, left click for molly, right click for wall, you can buff these two options without having to worry about overuse. I would increase the healing and damage amount his molly has, and yes, this would mean a overheal effect similar to Reyna. Because you would be able to gain this effect without getting a kill like Reyna, the effect would need to last for a shorter amount of time. Ideally to where if I didn't buy shields, but still wanted to push aggressively onto site, I could pop my molly, get the overheal effect momentarily, run into site, and have the effect wear off a couple of seconds after getting onto site. This creates the risk factor that balances the improved ability out. Using it correctly brings a lot of value to the team, but if you use the ability and don't engage an enemy right away, the extra health goes to waste. The buff to his wall would be simple. It would be to increase the length of the wall slightly and to increase the duration. This scenario plays out well if the two abilities are combined because each meets a different need. Since we got the most recent buffs, I have seen that players definitely use his wall ability, more than I initially thought. However, I have also seen that the wall can sometimes hold back the team because it's placed in a panic or in a last resort. I'd argue that by increasing the amount of time the wall is up, players will use this wall only in scenarios where it provides value and not when it comes at the cost to the team. It's still an ability that is available, but its purpose is even more clear to players, to cut line of sights for enemies. This means there's a new ability slot opened, and I think this would become his new passive. This being a concussion grenade, which works by Phoenix throwing a fireball that he controls when to activate, and once activated, lets off steam or heat that concusses enemies. This concussion would work similarly to the stunt from Breach and Sky, allowing Phoenix to push into objectives with an advantage. This ability could recharge over time or be regained after 2 kills. I still haven't solidified this piece. I chose this ability because Phoenix is always moving. An ability that makes him stand in place would be counterproductive, and he already currently has an ability like this with it being his healing. A concussion he controls would bring a much needed advantage to him, while also allowing him to set up his teammates depending on how many enemies he stuns. I also stayed within his theme of fire because that's important for the character. I won't disagree that this ability could be seen as weak, but I think it has potential. The fact that it's an ability that can be activated by the player and thrown instead of being controlled like Sky's dog makes it a strong ability. Neon's concussion is a strong ability when used correctly, so I think this option for Phoenix would not only fit his theme, but also his playstyle. And if we were to consider that this ability has more than one charge when Phoenix is in his ult, there's potential there. So now we get to the part of the video where I have to address the big question. Why are the buffs not enough for you, Mexx? And the answer to that is that the buffs are only delaying an eventual rework of the character. Remember when I mentioned earlier how people are saying that Reyna might be the worst duelist currently? Let's pretend for a second that this is true. Do you know what I would tell you she would need to be back in her prime? It's not a rework. Her current kit works great and is effective. It just needs one small tweak. Give her the 2 orbs she used to have. And what do you know? Suddenly Reyna's back to one of the best duelists. You could give Phoenix 2 mollies, 2 walls, and at the end of the day, it's still Phoenix. Just an average Phoenix. He needs that oomph, that final push that solidifies him as a solid option going forward. I said it earlier and I'll say it again, I don't blame people for disagreeing with my take here. Phoenix is alright right now. Definitely nowhere near what Yoru was at his worst. But I think for being a character that you start with from the moment you open up the Valorant client and finish that grueling and taunting boot camp, he deserves better. Let me know what you think down below. Let's hear some ideas. Agree or disagree with me. Let's keep it civil, and if enough conversations take place, we'll cover this in a 3rd video. Appreciate you all for staying until the end. Subscribe if you haven't already. See if I can make this content thing happen, and I hope you have a good one.